Welcome to the Santa Cruz Coffee Break. If you're watching on YouTube or listening on Apple Podcast, please follow, hit the like button, or any subscribes. It really helps us with the algorithms. Santa Cruz Coffee Break is produced by the Santa Cruz Guitar Players Forum. All opinions are those of the speakers. We invite you to join us on the Santa Cruz Guitar Players Forum at SCGCPF for more fun. Now, let's get on with this installment of Santa Cruz Coffee Break.
I was kind of hoping for the pink cowboy hat.
Oh yeah, it's now in a museum.
Yeah, that's all. That's all staged. We're gonna start the 74th Santa Cruz Guitar Players podcast right now with, and we're really honored to have John Thomas with us today as a guest.
Well, the honor's all mine.
Well, I think, John, you and I met at the first Fretboard Summit, I believe.
The freeze out in the camp there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that one a lot.
Yeah, that was a good one. Tad was there as well, and since we both kind of live locally, we didn't have to stay in the iceberg zones of. That was cold.
It was cold. It was funky, and I liked it a lot. I mean, it's
did
gotten more civilized, and I suppose probably more expensive. But I liked the whole, camp atmosphere. I don't know. People ran in between sets and got drunk at the bar and ran back out. What could be better than that?
Well, when it was tolerable to be outside, I remember there was some drinking going on at some of the picnic tables and things like that. But I don't know anything about that. John's the author of Kalamazoo Gals, and it's first of all, my wife wants it just on the title alone. And when I told her what it was, she went, "Wow, what a cool thing!" So the market is
all over the place.
Yeah, but
it's been the one thing I've written that's crossed all kinds of boundaries. I have a lot of stuff in academic literature, and I have stuff in music literature, guitar geek literature, if you could call it guitar geek stuff literature, and this crossed all the boundaries. It's been covered in regular literary magazines and reviews. It's been covered in feminist literature and guitar geek stuff, and just Midwest review of books, all kinds of things like that. And I get Amazon reviews from just people who like the story. So it's been a gift for me. Been the luckiest thing I ever did. Stumbled upon that and wrote it.
How'd you stumble on it?
I mean, it's hard for me to remember. All I know is I tell people the motivation was boredom. I mean, that's really legitimate. I'd been teaching law then for probably a couple of decades and sort of had that gig down. And I had been writing for law reviews and legal journals and that sort, and became bored with the sort of prescribed style. If you put any creativity into it, I'd usually be criticized. And then I began freelancing articles to music magazines, initially giving them away, just to go somewhere where I could write about stuff I really loved, but also that no one would say, well, you can't use passive voice or whatever. This looks too silly. And then at some point during that time, I think by then I'd moved up and I was doing articles for Fretboard Journal, of course. I did some for Guitar Player Magazine and Rolling Stone and stuff like that. And I was just going through some publication or online. I can't recall where. And I came across that photograph, the one that's now I've made famous, which is about 70 women sitting and standing out in front of the Gibson factory. At the time, I thought 30s, 40s, 50s. Those who watch this on video, I'm not much of an expert on hairstyles. And, it turned out I later got an original print, June 1944. So there's this bunch of women standing out in front of a guitar factory in 1944, middle of the war. I just couldn't figure it. And I had come across, by that time, one of the really early good books on Gibson history, also Gibson present, was called Gibson's Fabulous Flat Tops. And it had it's a passage about World War II Gibsons, that there have been a few made, and they've been made by the seasoned craftsmen who stayed back from World War II, and so they were of great quality. And the story all made sense, except that picture didn't have any men in it. I just started thinking about it, and I stuck it with pins on my poster board in my office. And every now and then, when I got bored reading cases or preparing for class, which was far too often apparently, I turn and look at that thing and think, gotta be kind of fun to find one of those people. That's where it started.
That's
Did
awesome.
did you find one?
Found 12 in that
Yeah.
photograph.
Yeah, it's amazing how the connection happens. But at one time, I live in Monterey, and our post office used to be in the CVS, and this person came in one day who was subbing for the regular guy, and she started saying, well, my dad worked at Gibson, and we've got about 40 cases. When he passed away, we have still about 40 guitars. And I'm like, Selena's post office, who, and I just lost her. Just sorry, I'm getting rid of somebody here. I just lost track of her, and it was sad, because and then they close the post office and they make it a big time post office, and everybody's gone, and you have no way to track them. But 12 of them.
Well, I was lucky in that it was a slice of the demographic that didn't move around. So I'm figuring, I'm doing a little math. This would be around 2008 or 7 or thereabouts, maybe 6. And I'm figuring they've got to be 80 in the picture, if at youngest. And how would I find them? And the internet's relatively young. And I'm thinking these aren't people who would be in internet chat rooms, right? They're just not of the right generation for that. And so I took out advertisements in all of the contiguous newspapers around Kalamazoo. So Kalamazoo Central, and then there's little tiny towns attached to it all the way around. And so I just ran for, I don't know, a week maybe. I don't know, maybe I had several weeks. I picked a Tuesday or Wednesday to put it in the ad in the paper, because I'd researched that was the most read day of most small scale newspapers, because they had the coupons for the grocery store. I was like, I'll go in there. And I ran this little ad that I'm, John Thomas, I'm out east. I'm going to come to town. I picked days, and I'm going to come to town. And if you worked at the Gibson guitar plant during World War II, or somebody who did, I'd love to talk to you or to them. That was it. And I thought, well, maybe I'll find one of these. Maybe someone will answer it. And 12 people responded, all women. It wasn't always the woman who worked there. It was either a daughter or more often a granddaughter who said, I don't know, my mom or my grandma really wants to talk to you. I'd like her to talk to you. And so I set up these appointments. And if they had moved, I couldn't do that across the country. And again, these weren't people that were on the internet at that point. I think, today it might work because you'd put it up on the social media sites and the grandkids or great grandkids would find it. But then there wasn't a possibility. So I just put these little newspapers out and then little advertisements and went to town. And it was just an extraordinary experience. I found 2 groups of women, those who gave me their addresses, said, come on by my house. And those who were wiser said, I'll meet you, but it's got to be in a, a brightly lit public place. They didn't know who the hell I was.
At the police station.
Right, exactly. So I went to houses, but also then I organized an afternoon tea at this beautiful bed and breakfast called the Kalamazoo House, which is built in the mid 1800s. And I thought, what did I know? I thought an afternoon tea would be the thing to do. And I called the proprietors of this place I found online, and they said, oh yeah, we could do an afternoon tea. They had just bought the place, didn't know how to run it. They didn't know what an afternoon tea was either. But they set up this beautiful little spread, and who knew finger sandwiches weren't fingers? I didn't know. And and tea and cookies and coffee and such like that. And that was on, I think, that was on a Sunday afternoon. And the couple days before, I went just driving around to these addresses. And this was at least for me, GPS. I had printed out MapQuest maps. I can still remember, having the map on my lap, trying to look at it, not run into people. And the first person I met was Jenny Snow. And I pulled up to her driveway. It's just like it's yesterday. And I can hear the car wheels on a gravel road, a little alt country reference for you, and stopped the car. And I'm sitting in the car thinking, what the hell am I doing here? I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have a book. I don't know if that's going to be a book. I don't know what it's going to be. Certainly don't have a book advance or any money for this. I'm just wandering around aimlessly with a with a recorder. My cell phones weren't even good for recording stuff yet. And I finally sit in the car, felt like an hour, probably 2 or 3 minutes. And I stand up and there's Jenny Snow, then late 80s. She's standing on her porch and she says, I thought you'd never get out of that car. And we come in and she turns out to be, if you know of the famous photograph, she's sitting in the front row, a little right of center. She says, that's me because I always wore a flower in my hair. And if you zoom in, you can see the flower in her hair. And it just became really easy. When did you start Gibson? What are your earliest memories? Where were you on December 7th, 1941? Same house. Jenny was in the same house. She points out the window and says, I was walking down with my friend so-and-so Sunday afternoon. People heard on radio that we'd been bombed and we're going to war. Just this window into history. And so it became this really easy process. Also, Jenny was the first one of about, I think of the other 12, I think 9 had treasure troves, just memorabilia that they kept, apparently on the theory that someday somebody would want to know about it. And so she ran back into her back room and drug out this box, and she had that original 1944 print, which she gave me. I typically wouldn't take those. I'd scan them, but she said, no, you need to have this. I mean, she had original string. She had string cutters, a few other things. She told me that she didn't really want to take all this stuff, but her husband, who was an employee of the telephone company, said it was her job to appropriate things from her employer. And she showed me the garage. Man, if you ever wanted a 1930, 1940, 1950 telephone, they were stacked to the ceiling in there. He took his vow of appropriation seriously. And so it was just an extraordinary thing. And I didn't take any of that stuff. I just didn't want to do it. I just didn't want to be that guy who shows up and takes it, doesn't pay for it, or pays too little for it. I've never, whenever anybody's offered me a Banner Gibson, I've always said, I'll either take it or won't. No, won't. But I wanted to praise by, and I picked George Green or Walter Carter or somebody. I'll either pay that or I won't pay anything. I don't want to be that guy who finds mom and pa have a 1959 Les Paul and pay him $50 for it. Well, some days I wanted to be that person, but I just didn't do that. And when all those people, when the women died, it all went away. I should have taken it. I should have at least made some arrangement. It was just junk. But anyway, that was my very first encounter with Kalamazoo Gal. And of course, I called them the Kalamazoo Gal. They didn't have a title yet. But when they walked into that factory in 1942, number one song on the hit parade, Glenn Miller's version of "I've Got a Gal in Kalamazoo." So I had a title.
So how did they find the job at Gibson? I mean, when the men were I guess drafted or sent off to war, did Gibson advertise for workers in some way that attracted women, or
Absolutely attracted anybody, but there just wasn't anybody else to apply. Yeah, they were just advertisements, and most of these women were straight out of high school. Their first job. Some had been out and working and had families and such, so it ranged from about 80 to about 95 when I met them, that thereabouts. So it's about a 15-year range in age, but the majority were straight out of high school. First job just came up. They're graduating that spring in 1942, or they had just graduated the prior year, and Gibson started advertising for jobs late December, late 1941, early 1942, and just started hiring. Of the women I found, about a quarter of them worked in building guitars, a quarter did wartime work, a quarter wound strings and made strings, and a quarter were doing administrative work, secretarial duties, and that sort of thing. I have no idea whether that's an accurate sample, but I think it's pretty close to what was happening there.
What did building a guitar mean back then? What were they actually doing? Do you know?
Yeah, well, so I tell people I have about a third of the puzzle pieces of crossword of a jigsaw puzzle, right? There's just gaps all over. There clearly were a few men left, and from what the women told me, they roughed out stuff. Like they cut out the sides, they roughed out the neck, and then sent the pieces over to the women, who would do some bending, although I think the men did some of that bending too. And then they would assemble it and essentially voice it. Right? They did all this stuff that we today think of as tuning the guitar, right? So they would cut the braces, sand the braces, um, thickness of the sides and tops, and that sort of thing. One of the great stories is if you read that fabulous Flat Tops book, it talks about an identifying feature of World War II Gibsons, the flat tops, and it's the bridges, that they look like mini sculptures, and they really do. Especially there weren't that many, but the belly down bridges that were on the Southern Jumbos are just these gorgeous sculptures, just really subtle and smooth. And anyway, I've met the woman who did those, Mary Jane Souls,
Wow.
third on my list, and she talked about what was the favorite thing to do at Gibson. I liked making the bridges. I can't tell you why. It fit in my hand. I could sand it as much as I wanted. I liked the smell of that rosewood, and she couldn't stop sanding. So they did the cut, fit the bracing, sanded the bracing, sanded the tops, assembled it, all that stuff that we would think makes the guitars sound like they do. I mean, one of my theories, there are a couple, and they're probably parallel theories that are right about the big chunky necks. One was that by 1944, Gibson couldn't use metal truss rods because of wartime metal restrictions, and so took the truss rods out and made the necks a little bigger. But they were always big through the war. And my theory is that none of these women played guitars. The men roughed them out. They sanded them down, and they just sanded them till they were smooth, right? They didn't. No one said it should fit your hand. I actually really love those big necks, but not everybody does. But that's one of my theories. I just didn't know. One of my favorite guitars I have is a Southern Jumbo that a young guy in New York State bought in late December, late 1943, December 1943, almost certain that it was hanging with Woody Guthrie's and Cisco Houston's SJs on the wall of New York Band, the music store where Woody and Cisco bought theirs, because there were three, and I can't find any other in New York around the time. But the young soldier took it to World War II, and it came back. When he died, he took the guitar to a dealer who said, John Thomas has to have this thing. And it's all beaten and bruised, and it's just all the more beautiful for it, right? But the X brace is nearly an inch off center. And so people say, how the hell could that happen? I said, I know how it happened. I asked these women, what kind of training did you get? They said, I didn't have any training. The boss was the men. The boss were still men, right? They were old enough to escape the draft. Boss sat me down and said, just do what she's doing. You cross it and you glue it. It was probably day 2 or day 3 when someone said, oh, no, they should be centered, but no one told them, right? So you get all this weirdness out of those guitars. That's really charming to me.
I remember, I think that where I met you was in Cremona, Italy. You were carrying that guitar around at the Cremona Music Festival about 5 years ago. I was there with Bruce Sexauer.
You were there with who? With
Bruce Sexauer.
Oh yeah. I took that guitar back to Europe many times, and would put it in the hands of as many people as I can. Those great Italian builders, Bagnasco and Casati, they made replicas of it with the offset X brace. I decided that guitar had a sort of a mission. It had liberated the world once, right? I could take it around. I've taken it to refugee camps and taught guitar lessons, and I'll lean it up against a building in the morning when I'm not using it and say, everybody should at least touch this, even if you don't play it. It just seems like kismet almost to take it back in those circumstances. So I've taken that guitar all around. I've loaned it out sometimes for a year. Actually have it here now, first time in quite a while. I felt it as a mission to put that guitar in as many hands as I can. I probably put it, I'm sure, over 1,000 people. Well
Wow.
over 1,000 people. Yeah, it's been fun.
Very nice. Very nice.
Well, it just it's so it's such a beautiful story. I mean, I had a whole bunch of questions about 4-piece tops and 4-piece backs, and is the truth about Sunburst that they used, they didn't use as good a wood on the Sunburst ones because they didn't have to, because they could cover it over and things like that. So I,
That's good,
I'm
man.
just, yeah,
Let me
I
tell
just
you about
did.
the Sunburst. Sure. So partway into the war, Guy Hart, the Gibson president, sends out a letter to retailers, in which he says, given our lack of visually good wood, you can only have Sunburst from here on out. Maybe not early. That was the point. That was the mission of the Sunburst, but maybe it was. But clearly, during the war, they used Sunburst exclusively because you couldn't find good pieces of wood. And so you probably have to break it down into timeline. So Gibson was running out of wood, and its equipment was old, and it got bought by Chicago Music Instruments in mid 1944, and at that point in time got an infusion of cash. And after that point, you see 2-piece tops coming back. Prior to that, Gibson's down just to scraps. I have this 1944 SJ. Whenever I say a date, the dates are all absolutely just estimates, because Gibson has never published anything to confirm any of the FON factory order numbers, which are batch numbers, as you know. Gibson has never corroborated any of those numbers. You can go look at the books that says letter A means this year 36 and letter B means maybe, right? And it's certainly what Gibson wasn't turning them over at the um, start of the year, right? And I had this great conversation with this woman who did most of the writing in the shipping ledgers during World War II. And I asked her, how did these FON numbers come in play? And for our listeners, the FONs are factory order numbers. And if you get a Banner era Gibson, you'll see stamped on the neck block a number, and then a number written in pencil after that, usually in red pencil. And the number is the batch number, and the red pencil number is the number in that batch. So your batch says 5782-31. It's the 31st guitar in that batch, right? But it doesn't mean the batch is 5,000. The batch makes no sense whatsoever, because I asked this woman, well, how did this work? She said, well, we bought pre-numbered pads down at the office supply store. Okay. And then what would happen when you got to the end of it? Well, I'd go buy a new pad. And did the new pad follow sequentially in number? No, it didn't care. And so as best we could figure out, and I say my friend, the great German luthier, Willy Henkes, has done most of the work on this. The early ones the very earliest ones are 2000s, then it goes to 900s, then it goes to 7,000. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So one, the numbers were never meant to be sequential, and two, Gibson just didn't care. So all of these are estimates, but by these estimates, we can say that by 1944, Gibson's running out of material. It starts to use, and even late 1943, probably, but all of this is probably right. Gibson starts using, sometimes you'll find laminated sides or backs. These are probably from the electric arch tops that they've already made. They got the wood set up. And you'll find the multi-piece necks, sometimes 3, sometimes 5-piece necks. Those are probably from those arch tops. You can see them on the arch top. They just switched them over and used them for the flat tops. And you start to see these 4-piece tops, little scraps, and you see the wings on the headstock. My 44 SJ has the 4-piece top. It has the wings on the headstock. It has the Gibson decal was applied twice. First it was off center, then they just oversprayed it and put it back on, so you can see 2 of them. I just love this stuff. And on the back, there was a big crack on the mahogany back, And so, but it's under the finish. There's a little tiny strip of ebony inlaid under the finish, and because they didn't want to lose it. So it's kind of off. You've got the ebony strip. It's ebonized wood in the center strip down the center, and just a little off kilter. There's a piece about, I don't know, 3-4 inches long. Also has a stacked heel. Was a stacked heel, 2-piece neck, right? And I just love this stuff about it. And so all that stuff comes up right when Gibson's being pinched hard. At the same time, the War Production Board issued an order. The War Production Board is just a fascinating entity, if you will. So starting late 1941, almost instantaneously after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the President FDR, creates a War Production Board. And it puts the captains of industry on it, all men from GE, from GM, all these big companies. And they are charged with converting the economy from a peacetime economy to a wartime economy, and issue all kinds of fascinating orders. For instance, shuts down Steinway piano because it uses too much metal in the soundboards of pianos. Shuts down Singer sewing machine, too much metal. You need it for airplanes and tanks and guns and machine guns, right? Stops the production of big skirts, wasting cloth. Zoot suits are out, wasting cloth, the big lapels. They just banned this stuff, right? Shut down gold and silver mines, or at least gold mines, because you don't using gold, even in electronics, apparently they weren't using gold in, so that the miners themselves and the mining companies would have to go work on stuff to produce steel and aluminum and other stuff like that. Now, if you did this today, just shut these businesses down, people would sue and claim it's unconstitutional because it is, right? You can't, but I only found one lawsuit, and I searched hard, and a gold mining company sued on the ground that it was unconstitutional just to shut their business down. I can go mine gold if I want. And it went to the Supreme Court, which happened just after the war because the appellate process took a little while. And the Supreme Court said, wartime emergency, which is probably the right response. But anyway, you look at that, and it's just extraordinary, the public buy-in to a war that we haven't had during our lifetimes. And there was a clear moral imperative, right? Evil and carnage taking over the world. So Gibson stuck in that, and at one point in early around April or June, some early to mid 1943, I don't have the book in front of me, but the War Production Board issues an order that stringed instruments can only have 10% of their weight in metals. So out goes the metal truss rod. It's Clusen, I'm sorry. Clusen patents these little tiny coin thin, like the gears are thinner than a dime. And it's just weigh roughly nothing. So you could still have a stringed instrument that would not violate that 10%. So you have a combination of the wartime restrictions and Gibson's running out of resources that has these guitars just very fascinating right at that time period. Then Chicago Musical Instruments buys Gibson in 44 and injects it with cash, so it gets bigger wood. We go to 2-piece tops, but they're Sitka, right? It's just easier to find. And also, so I have a joint appointment to a law school and a medical school, which makes me perfect to be a guitar player. I don't know how, I can't explain my life. But anyway, so I got access to digital x-ray machines and CT scanners. And one of the things they did was a little industrial archaeology. And you can see, and again, it's roughly 44. You can't date anything particularly. When Gibson stops cutting the dovetail with a bandsaw and now has a router. And even once in a while, you start to see a drop-in saddle rather than a cut-through saddle, right? Not very often, but you can see this stuff. So you have all these little percolations going on, and the guitars right in that time period are my favorite because you have no idea what you're going to get until you look at it closely.
Fascinating.
So unbelievable. Was there a restriction on glue?
No, not at all. It was so that's why we never can understand why only a Gibson isn't glued enough, right?
Right.
I hope that was your joke. No, so one thing I did, so let me talk a little about glue. Now, let me talk a little first. Let me hit glue second. So the way I found out this stuff is I hired a researcher to go to the National Archives and get me every single document that mentioned Gibson from the War Production Board documents, and I got 1,600 pages in results, right? And the stuff was just amazing. I mean, it's a window into the war. And you get their drafts of these orders with written hand marks, and then you get a new version. So you can see the orders sort of take shape over time, and the captains of industry, if you will, arguing about what restrictions to put on what industries. So you can see a little politics or a little economics going on in there. I also got a transcript of the president, Guy Hart, arguing in front of the War Production Board that his company is being run, this is a quote, almost totally by women, and that they couldn't keep up with demand for guitars, including from soldiers, which just totally betrays Gibson's stand until a few years ago that it did not build any musical instruments during the war. So lots of revelatory stuff out of that. Now, as far as glue goes, so I was able to interview these people, these women, and my second time to Kalamazoo, Willie Henkes came with me. I don't know if you know of Willie Henkes.
Right. Luthier.
Luthier builds great guitars.
Right.
B&H, Blaser and Henkes. They're just actually retiring and stopping now. Willie, one of the great experts on vintage guitars in the planet. As far as you got Willie and you got and Mark Stutman about Gibsons, and Willie and T.J. Thompson about Martins probably. Anyway, Willie came to Kalamazoo with me, and it was great because he would think of questions that I didn't have the knowledge to ask, including what kind of glues did you use. And so we get a description from one of the women who worked on guitars of using hide glue, of course. Yeah, just fun stuff, guitar geek stuff. Now I need before I drop off of that, because it reminded me, because I just posted on Facebook today. Every once in a while I Google Kalamazoo Gals just to see if there's anything interesting out there, and I came up with today an announcement of an obituary announced in Michigan. I thought there were only one Kalamazoo gal still alive, Irene Stearns, who turned 102 January 30th, but there was another one alive. She turned 98 last April, and she died. The announcement was today, but she died March 9th. Her name was Valera Wood. And so my first visit with my interviewees is this woman, Jenny Snow, who was in the front line with the flower on her head. And my second is Valera Wood. And so I'm so excited that I've found these women. I actually figured out something to talk with Jenny about. We talked for hours. She finally had to just kick me out. I've had so many questions just about the time and how life was. And it was sort of my second chance to visit this time. When I was a teenager and I could have asked my parents these things, I figured, like any teenagers, if they had experienced it, it wasn't worth talking about, right? One of those great regrets in life. We all were like that. By definition, you have to be egocentric or you ain't going to make it to adulthood, right? But this was my second chance. So when I got talking to these people, I just couldn't stop. Anyway, I'm on my way from Jenny to Velura, Velura. The only time I've ever heard that name, I like it a lot. And I got my flip phone back then, right? I call her up. I just talked with Jenny, and I'm going to come talk to you. So I don't want to talk to you. I've decided I'm not doing it. I said, well, I don't know. Well, I said, let me do this. Can I just drive by and shake your hand and I'll go away? That's it. That's all I want to do. She said, oh, okay. So I pull up to her house and ring the doorbell. The door opens like 2 inches, and a little skinny hand sticks out to shake my hand. She's not going to do anything else. And so I say, oh, can I just say hello? Can I at least see your face? And she opens it up and said, I'm a nice guy. Can I just come in and chat for a minute? And she said, yes. Someone told me I should have been a fuller brush salesman, right? Door to door. That's the trick you use. I should have sold her a vacuum or something. Anyway, we go in, and she has written on a Post-it, one of those like 2x2-inch Post-its, her whole summary of her life. Born this time, married this date, had kids then, worked for Gibson from 1943 to 1945, right? That's it. And she didn't want to talk to me. I said, can you just tell me what your job was? And she says, I was a guitar inspector. So how many guitar inspectors were there? Just me. Just you. Okay. When did you start working there? Well, it was March 1943. I was getting ready to graduate. I graduated in March. I don't know why I graduated in March. It must have been a quarter system. And I took this job at Gibson. How long did you work there? Well, till sometime in 1945. Give me a second. I got something in the car you've seen before. And I run out and I get my 1944 SJ and bring it in, and she re-inspects it. It's just this amazing thing, right? I've got pictures of her. I don't have video 'cause I don't know how intrusive to be. She's holding my guitar, right? I ask her things like, "What kind of training?" She had no training. What'd you look for? She looked for imperfections in the wood. What happened when you rejected a guitar? I would put it in the reject pile. And then what would happen then? My boss would come in at the end of the day and say, "Oh hell, that's just fine," and put it in the pass file, and they sell them anyway. So as your Les Paul Tad reveals, no Gibson has ever failed quality control. But anyway, uh, so I found out today that she died a couple of days ago. But that was
Uh,
just one. This is crazy. I often regret I didn't think of this 10 years earlier, because there have been more of them alive, right? And they would have been more vital. But thank God I thought about it at least just barely in time. And I got to go meet these pivotal figures in my life. They became pivotal figures. Just amazing. Yeah, so it's just what a story. I got so lucky with this story.
well, so okay, when the war was over, how many of these women continued to work for Gibson, or did they all just suddenly get laid off or fired, or what happened?
They weren't laid off. They just gave their job. They ceded their jobs back to the men. That's what they expected to do. So about a handful of them stayed on. Very few. Right. I mean, those who stayed on did the typical women's work that men didn't want to do, which was the clerical work and making strings, probably cleaning the place too. But the rest just ceded their jobs. I mean, that's just, it was 1945. That's just what women did, right? Those were gender roles of the time. The one woman who worked the longest was this woman, Mary Jane Souls, who did the bracing and built the bridges. And she worked into the 70s. And she
Oh,
was so good. So they kind of had to force her to retire. She was so good that whenever the luminaries came in, like people from other corporations or potential investors, or Mick and Keith, or any big rock and roll stars, they would bring them by her desk to have her do. By then, she was doing like this, binding the scrolls on the F mandolins and doing the fancy arch tops and all that stuff. She was a real crafts person. But most of them dropped right off. I mean, they went back to raising families.
wow, that's amazing.
Yeah,
You would
it's
think
just
that they would have broken some barriers or done something there and proven their worth, or I don't know how you would.
I think two things. One, Gibson didn't care,
Yeah.
and two, they had expectations, right? They were expected to raise families, and um, many of these were farming communities, right? I mean, there were kind of two jobs to do in that town: manufacturing or farming as a man. And if you're on a farm, someone's got to tend the kids and feed you, because everybody's working 24/7, right? So they mostly went back into those fields. Yeah. That was really interesting. So that's largely what happened. And Gibson wasn't happy with having women building their guitars, right?
Oh,
The only explanation I can offer is that Gibson didn't think the buying public, men, would accept women-made guitars, and I suspect they're right about that, right? So the advertisements, all the advertisements of the day said, "We're not building any guitars until the boys come back," and all of the letters to the retailers said, "We can only offer you these models because we got these kind of restrictions." And all, so they have two twin chains of communication: one to the public, "No, no, no, we're not building any guitars," and then to the retailers, "We're doing the best we can. We'll send you as many guitars as we can." Um, and so, I mean, so we know this one publication, Gibson's Fabulous Flat Tops, figured out, and I guess most players had figured out, that there were some guitars made during the war, probably, right? No one really knows, because Gibson's records aren't public. Um, the other record is by a guy who became company historian. He published this book, The Gibson Story. And I'm forgetting his name right now. I'm looking up, see if I have a copy right there. It'll come to me in a minute. But he had been personnel director from the late 30s up through after the war. And he hired all of those women who came there. And he published in this book, it was official Gibson lore for a long time. Lore, not LOAR, LORE. It was official Gibson lore that the company did not build any musical instruments during the war. That late during the war, it started doing some repairs, but did not build any musical instruments. And I, so, how can we challenge this? I started trying to figure out the truth about this, and I wanted to access the Gibson shipping ledgers because there were these mythical ledgers, mainly talked about in the Les Paul community, right? My line is that the original 2,000 Les Pauls built in the 50s, only 6,000 remain. Right.
Wow.
I mean, it's just, there's a lot of fabrication going on there. If you can do a good job of faking a 59, you can make some money. Anyway, and so I started at lower end Gibson with just customer service, and worked my way up to the administrative assistant to the president, and Henry Juskowitz. And each time along the way, I was told, "Look, we're a privately held corporation. We don't share this stuff. But two, we don't have that stuff." I had just about given up when a publisher of a magazine you know well emailed or texted me and said, "I just been talking to this person at Gibson, and I think they could be helpful. I'm trying to use gender neutral terms so I don't reveal the person who's no longer at Gibson as of relatively recently." And so I emailed the person who responded, I don't think so. I don't think we have ledgers." And about 20 minutes later, emailed me back, "I'm sitting here holding up this old dilapidated leather cover book, and it says here in 1938 we shipped a guitar to a guy named Les Paul, and we've got a bunch of these." So 2 days later, I was down there in Nashville. This is the corporate headquarters, and this is when I got to play my Robo Les Paul. So I'm wandering through Nashville corporate headquarters. We're walking down a hallway. First, I stop, and he shows me the Robo Les Paul. Maybe the early ones didn't have a lockout, but I had fun bending it. You couldn't bend a note because it would retune too fast, right? Did yours do that?
I didn't use it long enough to figure that out.
I was having the fun. I was thinking, how the hell can this work? You cannot bend a note. Anyway, that's a little aside, literally, because we went to the side. And then we walked down, and he opens up this closet of cleaning supplies. And on the floor are a stack of these old books. And I scoop them up and look through them. And the earliest one that existed was 1936. There's somebody has a photocopy of 35, but who's promised it to me, but I don't really need it anymore. So I grabbed 36 through 46. I just wanted to go after the war. I was too stupid to look for 1959. That's the Les Paul. That's the one that's worth money, right? It disappeared. I swear I didn't take it. Gibson got it back somehow. Anyway, and so Gibson set me up in a big corner office. Somebody had recently been fired or quit. I don't know which one it was, and put me in the office. And Willie Henkes came down to help me out. And my sister came down for one day to help me out. So a couple days, took me days, photographed 4,400 pages of this stuff. Now, while I'm in there, the person who let me in said, "Look, you can do it, rather run the building, doesn't matter. But if Henry Juskowitz, the CEO, comes in, you got to hide in this office." Now, I started wondering to myself, and how will I know whether Henry has entered the office? But like the second day I'm there, and I hear, this is literally true, I hear a guy running down the hallway yelling, "The fucking asshole is here." That's what they called him. True, absolutely true. And so I jumped in the office and closed the door. Anyway, and so what I do, and I get these home, and I count all of the banners, and there are about 9,100 banner flat tops listed. Every day there's a list, right? There's just someone just writes it down, and the information is the model, the retailer to whom it's shipped, the date's on the top, they stamped on the top of the page, the model, the retailer to whom it's shipped, and then what case of any can accompany it. It's all the information you get, right? And I also do a sample. I can't count every day, but I sample on the 15th of the month, unless that falls on a weekend, then I do the next Monday or something like that. And so about 25,000 instruments total during the war. So we've got the official story, right? The Gibson didn't build any musical instruments during the war. We've got the fabulous flat top story. They built a few. To the truth, they shipped almost 25,000 instruments. They're building instruments. And I've got the CEO, Guy Hart, in front of the War Production Board saying this company's being run almost totally by women. So there's no other way they were built. This is just crazy stuff. Since that time, not the current administration, but the Henry Juskowitz administration at least twice threatened to sue me for accessing the shipping ledgers and using them, images of them in the book. To which I always replied, "Hey, I am a former trialer. This would be fun. I can't imagine better promotion. You just tell me when and where, and I'll be there." And of course, they wouldn't sue me. Damn it. And in addition, of course, I would say, how do you think I got in there, right? I got permission. You think I broke in the middle of the night and did this? I didn't do it. Oh, even weirder. So while this is going on, just before the book comes out, Gibson contacts me through a really great guitar shop, the Music Emporium in Massachusetts, and wants me with the Music Emporium to create a limited edition series of replicas of my own collection. Now, you'll find out I'm not that bright, because they say, "What would it take for you, John?" And I don't ask for money. I'm just too stupid. I say, one, you have to credit the Kalamazoo Gals. Two, some portion, we can negotiate that later, of every sale has to go to a women's history nonprofit. And three, I know that you've got women working in the factory, and I would like them to build these guitars. Yes, 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 right? Gibson sets up two things. One is to fly me to Montana, Bozeman, Montana, where they've got the factory. And the second would be, that's to sort of finalize, look at the guitars, sort of talk through the specs. And the second would be to go to NAMM that year. And Gibson's going to have a big deal. They picked the right time. I don't know, it's 11 in the morning or 1 in the afternoon, whenever the most people will be there on the Saturday, and they're going to unveil these guitars, right? And somehow between when they set this up and when I land in Bozeman, Henry Juskowitz has found out about this. And apparently they hadn't cleared it with him. So they decide just to stop it. And no one will talk to me. And it reminds me, when I walk into Gibson, reminds me early on in my married career when my wife and I were living in a cheesy apartment. You turn on the light at night and the cockroaches just disappear. Like, I walk into a room and everybody at Gibson would just be gone. I'd be by myself with a couple of guitars, right? And so, what the hell is this supposed to be? And so I find the woman, not the luthier, but she's a vice president at Gibson and was helping shepherd this program. And I say, "Well, I want to talk to you about this." She's, "I can't do it here." And she picks literally a dark bar, the dark corner of a bar somewhere in Bozeman. And I say, "What's going on?" She said, "I can't tell you." "Well, is it true?" I ask. So I reached out to the woman who was doing custom guitars, who was supposed to shepherd this project through. I reached out to her, and she said she's told if she talks to me, she'll get fired. And this VP says, "Yeah, if she talks to you, she'll get fired." It's like crazy shit. About a month before that, Gibson had underwritten my book release party in Seattle, Washington, Fretboard Journal. Like, I can't figure it out, right? So I don't know. They drop it. There was the Gibson bus was supposed to be going from Bozeman to Idaho for some event. It was going to take me, but they wouldn't talk to me, so I had to rent a car and go. It didn't matter much more. But anyway, it's just bizarre. Gibson did, though, build reproductions of my own guitars, sold them as limited edition run in 2013. How could I get one? I had to buy it and then sell it, return it. I wanted to see what they were like. They're pretty good. They weren't 75-year-old guitars, but that's okay.
Yeah. Well, what's really funny about that is that there are a number of luthiers who figure that it was their moment of realizing they made it when they got sued by Gibson for, copying top of the headstock or some other minor little detail. But when they got that threatening letter from Gibson, they knew that they had made it, and sounds like you had that same experience on a different level.
Right. So, and I also had like a cottage industry of talking to those people. I don't practice, I teach, but I don't practice law. And certainly in those jurisdictions, it wasn't licensed, but I've gotten a lot of calls over the years about those things. And typically it's either the headstock, that open book headstock, Gibson calls it, or it's the bird's beak at the end of the fretboard, like on an SJ200 or an L5, those guitars, maybe Super 400. Yeah, Gibson got really excited about that stuff. I've given talks to intellectual law property groups, intellectual property law groups, and the Larson brothers used that headstock before the Gibson did, and also some Europeans did. So, but anyway.
No, I have a lovely Santa Cruz FTC that has those details on it.
I like those details.
Yeah.
I love that
Eh,
hairstyle. Yeah, I've cautioned a lot of it. Just change it. You don't really want to be in front of these
Yeah.
guys. Yeah.
It's amazing to me that you would think this would be such tremendous public relations and such wonderful marketing opportunity for Gibson, for them to treat it with this kind of, I don't want to say disrespect, but
Yeah,
I
I think
don't.
it's disrespect to this gal story. And then the current administration is much better. They haven't really organized themselves to put together reissues or anything like that. But the current administration is much better. They talk to me on occasion, um, and they've been generally polite. I did have a fun encounter with them in the last month or so. So I received a call from one of there's a production team that does something called Gibson TV, and part of it is called the process, and they've been documenting the process of building acoustic guitars, probably electric guitars as well. But anyway, asked me if they could use the Kalamazoo Gal picture, that picture of all those women in front of the plant in this story. I said, yeah, sure. Just make sure you credit the gals and you credit me, and you give a link to my website. That's all I'm asking. So, and the guy said, I'll do it and I'll send you a link. Of course, he didn't send me a link, but after about a month or so, I thought, whatever happens, I Googled it, found it, of course, and no link to my website. There is a little credit to me at the end, which is it just says Kalamazoo Gals photo John Thomas at the very end, the last of the credits. But during the during the in the video and also in the YouTube description and also on Gibson TV website, it calls the Kalamazoo Gals the Gibson Gals, right? Just totally disses it. So I reached out to this guy. I said, what happened here? You guys never change, right? What do you mean we never change? You never change. So anyway, I put it up on Facebook, and people from around the world posted in comments, what happened? You just totally dissed Kalamazoo Gals and John Thomas, and so they capitulated. They can't change the video, but they changed it. So I have a colleague, a fellow law professor, calls it a good old fashioned corporate beatdown. So I mean, they've changed, but they can't quite get it right.
Amazing.
th-
Amazing.
that I have I owned at one time a catalog from 1941 of Gibson that my ex-wife ended up getting, but they were building. I mean, it was. I'm sure you've seen it, John.
I've got all those catalogs. Yeah, they
they,
were building.
they were building. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, they shipped like 25. They shipped 25,000 instruments. Like, can you say we're not making any instruments? Um, I mean, so it's a weird thing. And so now, of course, that video, I will say, other than the kind of glitch for citing the gals, is really celebrates women in Gibson, and they've been gotten very good at that. It's just that at that time, I'm sure, you know, boys weren't going to buy girl-made guitars. They're probably right about that, given gender roles at the time and what have you. But I've always said to Gibson, you know, we could have made money out of this. What's wrong? It could have done good, public good. Probably could have made money. I mean, so that whole story, the original story, wraps up with BBC Radio did an hour-long documentary on Kalamazoo Gals,
Wow.
hosted by Susie Quattro. Remember Susie Quattro?
Yeah.
She was Leather Tuscadero on Happy Days, but
Yeah.
also, a good songwriter, good bass player and singer. Sort of had hits here, but she was huge in the UK. I don't know why that difference, but she was big. And so the producer of that show contacted Gibson's, and in particular, Gibson's vice president for international marketing relations, or some long title. And then she said she wanted to talk to me. And this is after Gibson has underwritten my book release party, had invited me to NAMM, but then shut it down and that sort of stuff, and it started building replicas and then didn't credit me. And so we're talking, and I said, you do know, don't you, that you underwrote my book? She responded to the BBC guy, we never heard of John Thomas or his book, but he violated our copyrights. Well, how would they know I violated copyright than her, me, or their book, right? Anyway, so I'm talking to her, and I say, you do know, right, that you underwrote my book release party? She says, can you prove that? So I don't have to prove anything, but you can go on YouTube and see your own vice president speaking about my glories. Yeah, I don't care. Now, and um, and then she threatened to sue me if especially if I wouldn't reveal who let me into the Gibson building. I said, I don't owe you anything, but you go ahead and sue me. Please sue me. She wouldn't sue me. So they have become markedly better. But I could never understand. I'm the skinny little old bald guy carrying a guitar around. Who would be worried about me? It's made the story more interesting, though.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, the story of the Kalamazoo Gals and that whole book, the experience you read about the book is fascinating enough. But honestly, I think you have enough material for a whole nother book here. Just
So I keep thinking of doing
Kalamazoo Gals.
a second edition with Gibson intrigue in it, right? And I owe books to everybody on the planet right now. But if I get around to it, I'm going to do that. Yeah, for sure.
Julius Belson wrote the
Julius Belson.
Gibson story.
Yeah, he died just before my project, but I did get to know his wife, and especially because when the BBC guy met me in Kalamazoo, somehow around that same time, somebody reached out to me and said he knew Julius's wife and could set up a meeting. And so I said, this would be great. And the BBC guy says, this is great because maybe I could get an answer to why Julius wrote that stuff, that we didn't build any instruments when they were building instruments. And I got his wife's first name I'm now forgetting. So we go over to, I got a gorgeous photograph of me with her. She's 95 at the time, something like that. And we go to her house, walk in, introduce myself, and I say, Mrs. Belson, do you remember your husband? I'm starting. She says, no. You don't remember your husband? No. Do you remember Gibson? No, she didn't remember anything. So I wanted to keep it in the BBC radio broadcast because she was the last person who might know. And she said, her voice was, no, no. So that I think it should have been in the broadcast. It would show the end of the road there, if you will. But a few years later, she had a fancy, I don't know what they call it in Gibson language, so a pearl topped and pearl decorated ukulele. I don't know what Gibson called it, but anyway, it was like the fanciest model, and it had been stolen. And so the Kalamazoo police called me and asked me if I would put out a statement that they could send around about the nature of that ukulele, how well known it was, it'd be impossible to fence, but it's also part of history. So I did that, and that night it was back on her door. Someone rang the doorbell and left it on her steps and ran for it. So I got a little story with the Belson family if I couldn't meet Julius.
But more than likely, Gibson threatened to sue him if he said that they made it.
It's probably true.
That was my thought. No. They're going after DiMarzio right now for double creams. It's the silliest stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
it's silly.
It saddens me because you sort of compare the approach of Martin versus the approach of Gibson. Martin is to some extent protective of its intellectual property. It should be, but I think always weighed the benefit versus the detriment, right? Okay, we could win this lawsuit, but we would lose so much goodwill that it would be detrimental to us, but also just to the whole community. So Martin's always tried to be a member of community and done a good job of it. Last time I was at Martin, Chris Martin was still there, and he had a bunch of Bill Collins memorabilia stuff around his office. And he thanked Bill. Bill had just recently died at that time, but he was grateful to Bill for making Martin raise its game, right? Like this is and he knew they weren't really directly competing, but also he knew that the goodwill you would engender would just haunt you and hurt sales. Just be crassly financial about it. Yes, I've never quite figured out. Gibson could have, and it still has the opportunity. Maybe I don't know, but it's created a lot of ill will through this stuff. Suing a guy who makes 5 mandolins a year, or threatening to sue. 5 mandolins don't bother you, but
Mm.
that letter ripples out to the community, and everybody hates you for it. Just don't, if it's some other company that might really eat into your business, okay, we can talk about that. But the little solo luthiers who are anyway, yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
It's the serendipitousness of falling into that kind of thing. It's it's right when that happens.
Yeah, I think so too.
You really do. It just all of a sudden one day it's like, oh, this is a story.
Yeah, that's how it
You
happened.
know, yeah,
And it's sort of organic because I didn't plan it, just sort of step at a time. Now, what'll I do next, kind of thing. Yeah, I think that made it more fun. I think it probably made the resulting book better as well, just because there's that level of I hope there's a feeling of discovery as you read through the book. Sure
Well,
does for me.
hopefully that works for our podcast too, since
I hope so. Now, I no longer have any Santa Cruz guitars, but I have had 2.
Ah,
So the first was a great OM Cutaway, voiced and signed by Roy McAllister,
ooh,
which I sold to fund my first Kim Walker guitar.
oh, okay.
Yeah, so that paid off. And the other was a Bob Brosman baritone, which was lovely. I just didn't play it. I played 3 of the songs I otherwise played, but I played it on baritone. I thought somebody who composes or something should have this, so I sold that one. But I love the guitars.
Yeah, yeah.
And Richard was a good friend.
Ted has I think Ted has 3 baritones. Don't be embarrassed.
Yeah.
3,
Well,
so I want to. There's some scuttlebutt about the Buddy Holly J45.
Let's hear it.
Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff that especially being here with Rick Turner and all of that,
Right.
and now that Rick is gone,
I'm your guy for this.
yeah, I know.
Scuttlebutt Central. Let me know. I'll answer anything I can.
How many they made? They made 20.
Oh, of the Buddy Holly Educational Foundation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually formed that organization illegally. I created this structure. It was then called the Buddy Holly Guitar Foundation, and Rick approached me. It was my idea to do this. So there was a wealthy guy in the UK who found out that Rick had the original frets to Buddy's guitar when Gary Busey had Rick refret it, and Gary Busey didn't want the frets back, so Rick had him sitting there, all except for one, which he gave to a girlfriend and told me it was well worth it. Anyway, so the rich guy wants to build a replica of Buddy's guitar and contacts Rick to do it. And Rick says, and I haven't written the book yet, but I've got a website up. I'm starting to search out a registry what these guitars were like. So you need to talk to John Thomas when he calls me or emails me or whatever. And as always, even though I had no idea what I was doing, I never tell people that. I just say, sure, I'll do it. And figure at some point someone's going to tap me on the shoulder and say, what the hell are you doing here? But it never happens, right? And so I said, we got these only 18 frets. One was gone, 18 frets. We should build 18 guitars and get them in the hands, put 1 fret in each one, get them in the hands of famous players and, spread Buddy's legacy. And he says, sure. And I said I could form a nonprofit. We form a nonprofit. And he commissions Rick to build all the guitars, at least the first 18. And Rick starts doing it. And I don't know what happens with Rick. He was a dear friend. We met first in person in Dallas, forming the board of directors of this nonprofit. And I originally recruited Marie Lena Hawley, Buddy's widow, to be on the board of directors. We met in Dallas and had the most amazing weekend with her. She was just astonishing in all kinds of ways. And the project proceeded, and then Rick couldn't get the guitars done. At one point, he sent around a photograph of, he had a whole bunch of sides, maybe all the sides and backs, maybe some necks cut. I can't remember the photograph, but it was like, sort of assembly line. He had a bunch of the parts cut out. And in the meantime, I got aligned with a group that was producing a concert on what would have been Buddy Holly's 75th birthday. It's in Hollywood. I mean, the band has Waddy Wachtel and Russ Kunklin and Lee
Lee
Sklar.
Sklar. Yeah.
It's just like the world's best band, and people going to play there are, well, Lyle Lovett comes and plays. Stevie Nicks does what would have been Linda Ronstadt's song, and just a whole bunch of cool people come there. And I'm going to give 2 guitars to people at that event. One is Phil Everly, who's not performing. He wasn't planning on performing. He was going to be there. And the other is Graham Nash. And Rick had promised me 2 guitars, and he sent one. And I said, what am I going to do? I'm going to present these in Capitol Recording Studio A with all the dignitaries there, right? And he said he was in the mail, would come the next day. It just never came. And so I went with James Burton to a Guitar Center to buy a guitar to present to Phil Everly. True story. Unbelievable. And so we go in, we play through James plays through the guitars. We pick one. Buddy had that leather cover. I've had somebody commission somebody else build. I've got the leather cover. So I get to put the leather cover on it and present it to Phil. You can see it's actually an advanced jumbo. It has those inlays. The best I couldn't get the J45. And then Graham, I give the one that was the Rick's guitar, which is the only one he completed. And can't raise Rick again after that. Just doesn't appear. So I start. Gibson itself wouldn't respond to build the guitars. So I just start picking people to commission the guitars, right? So I've got Dan Roberts, who used to work at Santa Cruz, right? Dan did a long time solo work up now in Montana. Great guy, builds great guitars. I just my own choice. People I thought could build of that sort of tone, right? And that look. Dan did some, other people did some. I wanted a British builder, so I got a guy named Atkins to build guitars. Tony Klassen built a couple. Other people, Dale Fairbanks, another number of people built them. We've got way more than that now. They're probably 40 or 50 out there now, but originally they were these frets, and I had the frets. I had sounds like Richard. You know how I got the frets. Do you know how I got them? Do you know the story? I don't know. I'll tell it in public.
No,
It,
no.
it involved threatening to have the Santa Cruz Sheriff's Department show up and get the frets for me. I had to threaten that, but they got to my house, and so I commissioned Gurion to produce like a label, a wooden label that would go inside the guitar, inscribed with laser etched with the name of the song, and each we called them ambassadors got to pick a song that would be tooled into the leather cover and put on that little wooden disc label, whatever it was. And then I glued the fret into that and then sent it to the luthier, who would glue that label into the guitars. The best one was I was running out of frets, so I cut one in half, literally true, so that Mick and Keith could each have half a fret in their labels. It was a wild time. And again, someone should have been saying, "What the hell are you doing this for?" So we got the guitars out. There's still, I mean, the ambassadors now include just a crazy select crew of, we've got Mick and Keith and Paul and Dylan and Clapton and some women. We got Dolly Parton and some others. That goes on and on and on. As of just today, Mark Knopfler released. It's a related project because I've been just barely involved in that, but an all-star performance of his theme song for Local Hero, and it has 70 of the most famous guitar players you've ever heard, including Sheryl Crow playing bass, and that sort of thing. Just released to raise money for teen cancer societies in the U.S. and the U.K. that Roger Daltrey and Pete Townsend formed. So it's been an extraordinary journey. Early on, I just wandered around the globe trying to lure ambassadors and getting just memorabilia for the organization. I think my favorite memory of all time, the guy who underwrote early on the foundation sent me to Lubbock, Texas to get the Peggy Sue gold record from Peggy Sue
Wow.
Guerin, right? So I had dinner with Peggy Sue Guerin and just started off with high school gossip. It was just the weirdest thing. It was like being in Lubbock in 1955. But the best part of the story is I arrived late. My plane was delayed or something. And so I'm speeding down the highways there. Or I guess you guys call them interstates or freeways. We call them highways out here in the East. And it's Lubbock, Texas. There's some huge um, Washington pork barrel going on there. It's got these giant freeways looping around the city with nobody in it, right? The roads are empty. Anyway, I'm speeding. I'm going like 75 or 80 on a 65 or whatever it was. And I got pulled over by a Texas Ranger, got a ticket. But then I got back in I got in my car, kept going, and met with Peggy Sue, and I've got a picture of her and me and the gold record. But the best part of it is, months later, I get a letter at my house here in Connecticut. There's a warrant out for my arrest by the Texas Rangers for failing to pay that ticket. And I paid the ticket, but I lost the damn letter. It's in my house somewhere. I want that framed on my wall. That in honor of Buddy Holly Foundation duties, I risked, detention in Texas prison. I think that's a good story. but that organization is going well. Those original 19 guitars, because I split one fret in half, are in hands of just really extraordinary people, and there are a bunch of others who have joined. It's been a really fun thing for me. I just, in February 9th, which would have been the 65th anniversary
Yeah,
of Buddy's.
just going to ask you about this.
Yeah, so I got asked to go play at the Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake, Iowa. So on February 8th, it was the day before. February 9th is the day the music died. Everybody knows Buddy and Richie Valens and the Big Bopper died in the plane wreck there. But the night before, they played a gig, their very last gig, at this thing called the Surf Ballroom, which looks exactly as it did then. It might have been painted, but it might not have been painted. And so I got to go do a little dedication, talk about the foundation, introduce Albert Lee, who's standing behind me while I'm talking, and then I get to play a tune with Albert Lee standing behind me. But that was pretty fun, a pretty cool thing. So yeah, I've had a great ride out of it, right? And been just lucky guy, for sure.
Just
Yeah, I am the worst guitar player.
Your heart's been in the right place, and
No,
it's obvious. But it's obvious because the world opens up to you.
Here's my big claim, and this is true. I am the worst guitar player to play all the best venues. Like if there is some award somewhere with the quality of the guitar and the quality of the venue, I win by a landslide. My favorite one of these, and this I'll forever, ever treasure this moment. So when I was in London doing my interview for the BBC, so they came and met me in Kalamazoo, and then flew me to London to record the actual. It's like a podcast, but they don't call it a podcast. The BBC audio documentary in BBC studios with Susie Quattro, right? While I'm there, I get a gig at Ronnie Scott's, the great jazz club, where it's my favorite all-time electric guitar recording. Jeff Beck recorded that, live at Ronnie Scott's and won a Grammy and all that.
Yeah.
And so I'm on that stage,
Wow.
and I walk in, and the manager said, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Kalamazoo Gals, and I'm going to play a couple songs, right? That's it. And I walk in, and the manager says, Jeff's coming to see you tonight. And Jeff who? This is Jeff Beck. So I'm sitting up there. Jeff comes in and sits in the front row, right? And I'm just like, 10 feet, 12 feet away from this guy. I always tell people it's a good thing I was wearing dark clothes so you couldn't tell whether I soiled myself. I mean, it was just a magic night. And I got to play and talk with him for quite some time afterwards. He was nice to my family. It was just a beautiful night. So this led to that kind of thing, which is just extraordinary. Of course, then Jeff dies, and all I could think of is how lucky a person I was to, have spent time with him and have him. He told me you played great, mate. I got witnesses. They're all my family, but still, yeah, it was extraordinary. All that kind of stuff. Hanging with him, hanging with James Burton, hanging with all kinds of people. I've been really lucky to do it. I've had, just a great time. And I played guitar all over the place, largely not because of my skill, but because of luck. Yeah. Nobody's luckier than me.
That's
Sounds like you got the title for your autobiography right there.
Well, a friend said a couple of years ago, but I've been repeating it more often than I should probably, that he considers me the world's luckiest unlucky guy. I don't know if you know the other story, but I've had 4 years with cancer and complications with that and radiation, and got COVID 3 times because of the cancer, and hospitalized twice with COVID. And then the big event was I was training for a big bike ride and collided with a deer on my bicycle,
For that, yeah,
broke
yeah.
18 bones, punctured both lungs, right? And I keep getting back up. So, every day I can play guitar, I can ride bike still. I get to do this with you guys, you cool guys, this
Excellent.
is,
I, I, I can't thank you enough for your time on this. It's such a cool, beautiful story, and it just radiates out of you. I mean, it's just alive in you, and that is you. I have followed your last 4 years, and there's a lot of times when, I'll be a fan here. Reading what you've gone through, I'm like, that's easy. What I got to do is easy. I didn't break 18 bones, and also you cycled last year 3,300 miles.
almost 8,300.
83. Yeah, I knew there was a number that I forgot to
Yeah,
connect in
and
there.
climbed over 400,000 feet. Yeah, no, I'm lucky. I will say this though, that cancer's been a perverse gift, very perverse, but also a gift. And the most recent manifestation of that, I was down at my cancer hospital getting some kind of fancy scan, and sitting there, and among the younger people, thinking, I'm almost starting my little pity party, thinking, which is just stupid. And in walks a 4-year-old, no hair. Her dad's got her by the hand. She's coming in for her latest infusion for leukemia. And she hides behind a chair. She didn't want to come out. Her dad's trying to convince her this is a good thing. And I think, you know what? I got nothing. And every step along the way, one of the really interesting times was the radiotherapy. You do it at the same time every day for 8 weeks. I mean, Monday through Friday. And it takes 10, 15 minutes. So you end up meeting people who are just before you, just after you. And they're all in different stages of their care. They got different kinds of cancer. And every single day, there's someone who's worse off than you, who's doing his or their best to be positive about life and feel lucky about it one more day. And there's always somebody worse off. So it's been, I've tried really, really hard to be public about it. Earlier in my life, I never would have, I wouldn't talk about this private stuff. My line now is, it's probably true. You want to see my scars? I'll drop my pants in the parking lot. I just don't give a shit, right? If it'll help you somehow. And every week in the last about year, I've had a phone call with somebody else with cancer, either the person or one of their loved ones, just to talk about it. And so I've tried to do my best to make it positive. There have been dark moments, but not very many. I mean, I just feel lucky. I mean, you know, I got to play with and for Jeff Beck. What the hell? I got nothing else to say. I can die tomorrow. It's fine. And I got to do the Santa Cruz podcast. Like, what the else? I got nothing else to do. No,
You
I'm
know,
lucky. Thank you for this. Thank you for the stories, but I feel very, very, very fortunate.
yeah, I've had a little thing with some dental surgery in the past week, and haven't been able to eat, and was laying in bed last night watching Check Please Bay Area, as they're pulling out pizzas from Toto's, and all these great places around, and I'm really hungry, and I'm thinking, this is a piece of cake. I'm not in Gaza, and I'm not a kid who's starving to death, and
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you on that. Yeah, perspective is helpful. Yeah.
Yeah.
it is. John, we won't take any more of your day.
My pleasure.
We're just, I can't thank you enough. We'll probably post probably post Monday, maybe Tuesday, depending on what traffic looks like. You know, we'll go for the big traffic. All
We need to make sure we get all the links so that we can share those to people if they want to find out more about Kalamazoo Gals, find out about your foundation, find out.
Yeah, the foundation links
I'll send
are
stuff
things
to you.
that'd be great. Because we'll get it out there and make sure, because that's the important stuff, you know, that we do.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for caring. It means a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's our pleasure.
Hope we
Our
all meet up
pleasure.
again soon.
We hope you enjoyed this installment of the Santa Cruz Coffee Break. For more music-related fun, please join the Santa Cruz Guitar Players Forum at SCGCPF or santacruzguitarplayers.com. If you have any questions or possible podcast topics, please contact us. If you have a product or service that you feel would be of value to our listeners, please consider adding your support and keeping the coffee pot on. Contact us for more information. We ask that you hit the like, follow, bell, or bookmark buttons so we can keep you informed of upcoming podcast episodes. We hope you enjoyed Santa Cruz Coffee Break. Now it's time to go play your guitar.